Trevor, now we get into the matchup of the Notre Dame pass game against the the Georgia pass defense. We talked about the battle of the run game was strength on strength. This battle, and again, Georgia had some issues on the run game last year or this regular season, but they had a lot more good performances against the run than they did bad performances against the run. This is an area where I think has been the biggest Achilles heel for them most of the season, and that is their pass defense. However, Notre Dame hasn't exactly put a pass offense on the field that makes you think they can take advantage of it. So while that was the sort of the strength on strength, good on good, this is the one that's a little bit more concerning when you look at the Notre Dame pass offense against the Georgia pass defense. And I say concerning, I mean for both sides has been a concern. I think if Georgia fans are probably looking at this matchup saying, I don't think they're going to be able to do anything against our pass defense. And I think some Notre Dame fans are looking at it saying, like, that's not a very good pass defense. And they're both right. Georgia doesn't have a very good pass defense, but Notre Dame hasn't shown us that they can consistently take advantage of those type of performances. I think this matchup right here, Trev, is going to be so huge because, as we said, Georgia can shut down your run game if you get no help from your pass game. They just will. I'll be shocked if Notre Dame just runs all over Georgia without doing anything in the pass game. Shocked. And this is coming from someone who thinks Notre Dame has an elite rushing offense. But again, when you get to this level of best on best, if you can't be balanced, to your point earlier, good teams will be able to stop that one thing that you do well. That's going to leave this part of the team. It's going to have to step up for Notre Dame and take advantage of a group at Georgia that, yes, they have an All-American in Malachi Starks, but there's a lot of youth at corner, right? In Dalen Everett's young kid from where I'm from, back in the 7.57, talented player, but young. You've got Malachi Starks, who's an All-American at safety. Dan Jackson, to me, is a little bit more of a liability there. Their linebackers are pretty aggressive. You can take advantage of that in the pass game. Ole Miss certainly did, with their backup quarterback in the game, mind you. Took advantage of their linebackers and their nickels in space. We're going right over the middle of the field, taking advantage of them. But Notre Dame, as we said, is not a team that has been able to show the ability to take advantage of those things. So, and I just want to point something out here real quick. This is I've gone on a couple tangents about Xavier Watts and him getting screwed over for being a unanimous All-American. I just want to remind y'all that in the last 2 years combined, Xavier Watts has allowed 355 yards passing. He's allowed 35 completions. He has given up a grand total of 0 touchdown passes while picking off 13 passes and 6 breakups. In 2 years, 355 passing yards. This season alone, Malachi Starks allowed 33 completions and 449 receiving yards, had two touchdowns allowed, 1 pick, 2 breakups, and this freaking guy was a first-team All-American according to the freaking Football Writers Association of America, and not Xavier Watts. This is no shade on Malachi Starks because he's an excellent football player. This just goes to show how stupid the football writers were for having him on their first team and not Xavier Watts. Xavier Watts has scored as many touchdowns the last 2 years by himself as 2 more touchdowns the last 2 years he's scored than he's allowed the last 2 years. Xavier Watts scored more touchdowns this year than he allowed. And Malachi Starks was the first-team All-American. Now, I'd have Malachi probably on my second team. He's a heck of a football player. But the fact that a cat that allowed over almost 100 more receiving yards this year than Xavier Watts has allowed the last 2 years combined is a joke and disrespectful to Xavier Watts, and I hope he makes people pay for it. However, Malachi Starks is still a really good football player. But as you showed, he loves to come down and hit. He loves to come down in the box. Are those some areas that Notre Dame can take advantage of? You look at their corner, Dalen Everett. He's going to be a star player, but so far this year he's allowed a 70% completion percentage and given up 532 yards. Right? Daniel Harris, their other corners, giving up a 66.7% completion rate. Now, that has to be taken with some context because Georgia plays a lot more off coverage than Notre Dame does. They give up a lot of 5 and 6 yard hitches and out cuts and things like that they're just going to allow you to do, because then occasionally they'll drive on it, break it up, and step in front of one. So they're always going to give up more yards passing than Notre Dame's corners, just by the nature of how they play the game. Even if they're equally good, like if you put Notre Dame's corners at Georgia, they'd give up more receiving yards than they do at Notre Dame, just because of the nature of the defense. That's not good or bad. It's just different, right? However, that's a big, big difference from where Notre Dame's corners are to where Georgia's corners are. But then the question, Trevor, is can Notre Dame's outside receivers take advantage of that? Does Notre Dame have, can Jaden Greathouse and Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridon actually make plays against Malachi Starks? Can they make plays against Dan Jackson? Can Mike Denbrock do things schematically, formationally, to force Dan Jackson into coverage, which is not where you want him to be? Those are all the chess match in this game here, and this part of it, Trevor, is even more important, in my opinion, than what we're going to see in the run game. Because mediocre pass defense against a mediocre pass offense, both have shown moments of being better. Which one shines? That's going to be a huge part of this game, Trev. Huge part.
Yeah, when I break down Notre Dame's pass offense versus Georgia's pass defense, this is the key to the game. If I'm being 100% honest, I really believe that. And not to say, will Notre Dame be able to pass for 300 yards, or will Georgia be able to hold them under 100? Like neither, right? But it's going to come down to who can make more plays when it's crucial, right? Like it's weird to think. Like I felt like Riley Leonard made a lot of plays in the passing game against USC. He finished the game with 178 passing yards. You know what I mean? Like it's weird when you think of it like that, but it has to resemble something like that. Who can make more plays? Who can make more plays at that time? Because this is one of those games, like I said, where it's going to come down to not every third down is going to be 3rd and 2 for Notre Dame. I mean, you can make the argument that most third downs that Notre Dame has faced this season are not 3rd and 2. But there's going to be a point in the season where they're going to have to push the ball down the field to either put the game away, to get back in the game, to stay within the game. And I think the Sugar Bowl could be one of those, right? And it's a tale of two same sides of the ball when you talk about the narrative surrounding each, stats show it right there. One thing that I do think that is weird that, because I have an article coming out about this between the Notre Dame wide receivers and the Georgia secondary, is they haven't turned the ball over much, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
In the secondary, they rank 93rd in the country, but
it's a very low risk passing offense.
Mm-hmm.
It limits the turnovers, but it's also why you have a 66.5% completion rate. Mm-hmm. But it's also why your yards per attempt and yards completion are down.
Yeah,
because you're not a risk taking pass offense.
Sure,
I think that's really what it boils down to for me, Trevor.
Yeah,
can you be that way against Georgia?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. No, I agree with you, man. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I think there's two different narratives that you can look at for Notre Dame's passing game. It's like, they rank 100th in passing offense and get 196.8 yards per game. And if you look at that stat just in a vacuum, it's like, ooh, that's not great. That's like maybe, well, I know it's a good amount higher, but not a crazy amount higher than like offenses like Michigan, who like physically can't pass the football, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you go, and on the flip side of that coin, it's like, what game have they been in where they've had to pass for more than 200 yards? You know what I mean? Like they have, right? They've gone over 200, but I can't go back and think of a game where Notre Dame has been in a spot where it's like, Riley, we need you for 280 today.
Well, even the A&M game was that way. They didn't need him to throw for a bunch of yards, but he needed to make some plays in the fourth quarter, and he did.
Mm-hmm.
Louisville game, they didn't need him to throw for a bunch of yards, but they needed him to make some plays in the fourth quarter and early in the game to spark a big lead in the fourth quarter, and he did. With that slot fade to Jalen Harrison, and then obviously the screen pass to Jeremiah Love. But I think Georgia can put you into that game, Trev, and that's one of the concerns, the legitimate concerns you have as a Notre Dame fan and Notre Dame analyst is, can they win in a game where they have to throw the football for 250 yards? Well, we don't know that they can't, but we don't know that they can. Because, like you said, they haven't been in that situation. Because, you look at, for example, the Notre Dame team, right? You look at that where Notre Dame was this year, Trev, and And to your point, what is the game where they needed them to throw for 250 yards or 300 yards? They haven't had that game. I mean, even Northern Illinois, he didn't need to throw for 250 yards. He just needed 180 yards. I mean, literally just get 17 more yards at the end of that game, and you're kicking a field goal to win it. And, maybe we're having a different conversation right now, meaning maybe Notre Dame's undefeated and playing Arizona State because they're the 5 seed, or maybe Notre Dame's 10-2 because they didn't have that that adversarial moment or adversity moment where they rallied. And we don't know the answer to that. We know that they did. But to your point, Trev, they beat Louisville throwing for 163 yards. They beat Georgia Tech throwing for 217 yards. They beat Navy throwing for 201. That was a game where they were on pace for about 300 yards and then just stopped throwing because at halftime they had such a big lead at halftime. And Army, he was on pace for over 280 yards, and they stopped throwing in the second half. So, and then Virginia, we saw that he finished with 214 yards. He's at 300 if he doesn't have that 78-yard touchdown pass called back on a play that had nothing to do with the actual throw and completion. So, but that's Virginia. This isn't Virginia. This is Georgia, right? And that's going to make this very interesting. But and the other thing too is Georgia's numbers are also a little misleading. They rank 50th in college football in pass offense. If you look at just games against FBS opponents, they are 70th in pass defense this year at 224.6 yards per game. And their yards per attempt average, they would rank 42nd. But that's which drops them down a little bit. But they played Tennessee Tech this year, Trev, and they held Tennessee Tech to 18 yards passing.
Oh.
They went 5 of 8. I believe they're an option team. Right. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And they've given up over 300 yards in their last 2 games. They've given up over 300 yards 4 times this season. They've also held Florida to 113. They held UMass to 125. They held Kentucky to 114. They held Clemson to 142. Come to find out, that Clemson pass offense was a lot better than maybe we thought it was.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, I don't know that it was. And as we said, that go watch that game, Trevor. There were dudes coming open in that game, but Cade Klubnik couldn't hit them. That's going to be a big part of it. But here's the one thing. We'll get to the matchup here in a little bit, Trev. But when you look at these numbers, Notre Dame ranks 100th in passing offense. Georgia ranks 50th. We talked about the context of that. Where that kind of ranks, nationally. If you're, if you take out the other aspect of it, I thought that's a pretty interesting statistic if you look at it. Notre Dame, if you look at just against FBS opponents, they're 97th. So they were about the same against FBS as they were against, Power 5. They were against FBS. They only played FBS teams this year. So that doesn't move them a whole lot. It just puts them up 3 spots. But if you look at Notre Dame against Power 5 teams this year, they rank 72nd in passing offense. They complete 67.7% of their passes for 205.2 yards per game against FBS, and they're 22nd in pass efficiency against FBS Power 5 opponents. So if you only look at their games against Power 5 opponents, they actually rank 22nd in pass efficiency. So they've actually been better against FBS Power 5 opponents than they were in some of the other games, because you go back and look at how they were. 2 of their worst passing games of the season this year were against Northern Illinois and Miami of Ohio. And it's kind of nuts to say, but that's a fact. They were terrible throwing the ball in both of those games. That's a different team than that, right? It's a different team than that. So that part's going to be interesting. But this matchup to me is going to be important, Trev. And neither, like I said, neither of these teams are. We can spend the numbers however we want. Here's the bottom line. Notre Dame's not a great passing team. Georgia's not a great passing defense. It comes down to that. It really does.
Yeah, it's a narrative of the game is going to be what I don't want to call it a weakness, but what aspect of these teams wins the day, right? Which is going to be the first one to falter. And the thing that comes to mind for me for Notre Dame, right, is Notre Dame's passing offense has not been asked to do a lot this season, mostly because they haven't had to. But in the brief moments that they've been asked to, outside of the Northern Illinois game, they've came through, right? Had to push the ball down the field against Texas A&M. You're not driving down the field for a go-ahead touchdown and you're running it 9 times, right? Bo Collins had to get that chunk play. You get the offense started against Louisville. Jaden Greathouse had a really, really good game, right? And they had a really good first quarter, put the offense back in it against USC. With it being that type of a shootout game, you are going to have to be able to find different ways to push the ball down the field. But in my opinion, it's just been moments, right? Notre Dame's passing offense hasn't had to have long durations of time where they've had to be an efficient passing offense. So that to me is a concern on the Notre Dame side. And then you look at the Georgia side. You look at how some of their games have played out in moments where they've had to stop the pass. They have not been able to. I mean, Alabama jumped out to an early lead and Georgia battled all the way back. And almost completed the comeback. And then in one play, Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams turned that game around. In the moments where Georgia Tech had to pass the ball, they were able to do it. I mean, outside of the 2-point conversion fiasco, and you guys all know how we feel. You know what I mean? And so that's what's interesting about these two teams, man. So it's going to be interesting of who wins the day, who executes more at a higher level, and who makes the most plays. That's what that numbers aside, that's what it comes down to. But that's what those numbers speak to.
Where I give Georgia some credit with their pass defense is they were very good in the red zone against Texas in the throwing game. That's why Texas had to settle for so many field goals, because they would give up yards. And then once the field got reduced and the safeties could kind of play more alley football, you didn't have the threat of throwing it over the top. Texas was a lot better. Georgia was a lot better. So, I think those are aspects that you have to look at and say, if you get into the red zone, can your pass and Notre Dame in the red zone has actually had a pretty decent passing offense this year because of their tight ends and some other different things that they've done. That's a part that could be very interesting as well. I would love to, I should have this statistic, and I haven't done it, but I would love to see a statistic where you look at Notre Dame's passing in the red zone, and then what would Georgia's pass defense be in the red zone? Because I think that's an area where I have seen them be more effective, and that's why they've only given up 13 touchdowns. They give up a lot of yards, but they don't give up a lot of touchdowns throwing the football. Because I do think in the red zone they've been a lot more effective this season when it comes to stopping the opponent in the red zone. So that part will be very interesting when you look at it, Trevor. I think when you look at the keys to success for Notre Dame, what are the areas where you feel like Notre Dame can perform in this game? I do think this is a matchup where the tight ends could be impactful. If they've got to step up, this is a game where they could be impactful. If your tight ends are making plays in the pass game, that means their linebackers and or safeties have to be more cognizant of them, which means maybe they can't play as hard downhill. Look, sometimes, Trev, a team is going to do something to try to stop you. You know that the other opponent is going to come into this game and have a game plan. Notre Dame early on was preparing for Indiana to load the box and come at them. That's why they did so much 12 personnel early. Indiana didn't, and that's why Notre Dame ripped off a 98-yard run. They had to be prepared for Georgia to come in and say, hey, listen, we are going to shut your run game down. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. The really good coaches are ones who will say, hey, listen, we're going to go at that early. We're going to make you pay for that early, or we're going to be ahead of it and say, we're going to do this early to make sure that you can't do that to shut us down. One way to do that is to get your tight ends involved in the passing game early, especially over the middle of the field, and get Jaden Greathouse going early and often. Get Jaden Harrison going early and often in this game, especially Jaden Greathouse, because if you can say, hey, listen, your linebackers, your slots, because here's something that's going to be interesting. They have a nickel defense. Now, Notre Dame comes out in 11 personnel. Georgia has a decision to make. Do they put Jonel Agaro in there as their nickel, or do they do what they did against Georgia Tech early, which is leave Jalen Walker in as basically their rover, and they went with a 4-3 defense? And I could see them doing that. And then what is Notre Dame's counter to that? How do they use Jaden Greathouse? How do they use their tight ends to try to take advantage of that? That's going to be a very, very interesting aspect of this game. And then what can Mike Denbrock do to get them in good matchups? What can he do to try to get Jaden Greathouse or Jaden Harrison matched up against Dan Jackson in the way that they do their pattern match coverages? Like, one thing I pray that we see I pray that we see some sort of play action, double post type action in this game, or some sort of, like we saw early against Navy, some sort of, they've got Malachi Starks down. So like go 2 tight ends right out of 12 personnel to the boundary. And you got your slot over here, whether it's Mitchell, whether it's Jaden Greathouse, whoever it is, Chris Mitchell, whoever it is, Jaden Harrison. And if you run action at the 2 tight ends, Malachi's coming down, and now Dan Jackson, who's their field safety, because they play a lot of field boundary, he's going to now be in a one-on-one against Jaden Greathouse. Do something to get that matchup. Even if you give him like a corner post, some sort of situation there where you can steal a big play. They're going to have to try to do some things like that. And that's going to come down to Mike Denbrock. Really coming up with a game plan is to say, we're going to do some things to get our guys into scenarios where we think we can take advantage of what they do. And that's going to be a big part, because what's interesting is 2 of the best safeties that Notre Dame played in the second half of the year were the Sanker kid from Virginia, who plays a lot like Malachi Starks style of play-wise, and then the Lane kid from Navy. And in both games, he went at the safeties early with the throwing game, downfield shots. Does he do that again here? We'll see. I don't know. But he's going to have to get creative with how they align against Georgia, how they move. I don't know that Georgia's a team that necessarily a lot of pre-snap movement does a whole lot to them. They don't move a whole lot on normal motions and shifts. Not a ton, because they're not front. They don't have to move their front. If you move your tight ends, they don't have to move their front. Where they can get in trouble is with some tempo. Can Notre Dame do some things with tempo? You don't have to, move a lot pre-snap, go more tempo to get them to declare coverages early, and then you can go at them. Those are things that I'm very curious to see. How does Georgia come at you personnel-wise in your 11 personnel? We know what they're going to do, 12 personnel. They're going to put Jalen Walker and 2 of the inside linebackers on the field. That's what they're going to do. They're going to be 4-3 personnel if you do that. How are they going to do 11 personnel? Are they going to also – because Notre Dame what's different about this Notre Dame offense and past Notre Dame offenses is past Notre Dame offenses would run really well out of 12 and then just kind of oak out of 11. This team is actually more dynamic out of 11 personnel running the football than they are 12, because they spread you out. Does Georgia, who are smart coaches, say, okay, yeah, your 11 personnel does not scare us throwing the football, so we're going to still have Jalen Walker on the field. We're not going to fall into you're an 11, so we got to put our nickel on the field. Like when you're playing Ole Miss, they go 11 personnel, you got to put your nickel on the field. When Notre Dame plays 11 personnel, you may not feel you have to put your nickel on the field. And then if that's how they do it, what does Mike Denbrock do to counter that in the throwing game? Because if you try to throw a bunch of those perimeter screens they like with Jalen Walker playing in space, that might not go well. But if you get him to have to flip his hips and do some different things down the field, now you might be able to have some success, getting him out of the box, and even if that means some run stuff, you know what I mean? So I'm very curious to see how that matchup goes, but this is going to be one where Mike Denbrock's got to earn his paycheck, right? And he's earned it look, for all the issues we have, they have that off those passing game rankings right there. Right there. Notre Dame has played, 6 ranked teams this year, and they have that passing numbers. And yet they score 38 points a game, almost 39 points a game. Mike Denbrock's earned his money so far. He's got to do it again. And these are the kind of games you brought him in for. I mean, these are the kind of games you brought Mike Denbrock into to Notre Dame for. And it's not just about, okay, you got better players, but what are you going to do schematically in your game plan and preparation to have some success against them? Because, we saw him go against Georgia 2 years ago at LSU. They had over 500 yards of offense. Now, some of that was late in the game, throwing some chunk plays when they were down big. But remember, they moved the ball pretty well against Georgia early. They just had a missed field goal that got returned for a touchdown. They had a turnover inside the 20. But they also had Jalen Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and, those type of guys. So it's a little bit of a different personnel grouping. But this is a defense he's very familiar with. Is he going to be able to take some advantage of that? We don't know, but he's going to have to. That's going to be the big thing when you talk about this matchup, Trev, is Mike Denbrock putting his guys in position to be successful. What does that mean? Does that mean Jeremiah Love in space? Does that mean your tight ends? Does that mean Jaden Harrison? Does that mean Jaden Greathouse? A little bit of both? We're going to see.
Yeah, do anything that you can to get your players in space, right? Crossing routes, levels concepts, get your running backs involved in the passing game, something. Because that is going to be the one thing that is going to be interesting is how much do they get Jeremiah Love or an Aeneas Williams or even Jadarian Price involved in the passing game? Because there is a chance, I don't want to say that, if Notre Dame just comes in ready to play, then they're going to dominate on the ground. No, I'm not staking that claim. But there is a chance that Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of success running the ball against Georgia. Could be, but you're going to have to find ways to get the ball into Jeremiah Love's hands. Find something in between inside zone and duo and a wheel or a slot fade. You know what I mean? Like do anything that you can to get the ball into the hands of 4-24-20. Get the ball in the hands of Jaden Harrison and Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse early, because just good things happen when they touch the football. And then for me, the final thing is, in terms of key to success is, they're going to have to win at some point on the outside. That is the one thing in Notre Dame's passing game that I think that has hindered them this season is lack of success on the outside. And they're going up against two good-sized corners in I forgot the other kid's name, but against
Dalen Everett, yeah.
Yep.
Julian Humphrey, before he left, was also a pretty tall, long kid. So that's definitely tight. Cleveland, the kid they had was that way. Eric Stokes was over. He likes big corners. The kid they got from Georgia a couple years ago, Darian Kendrick, was a 6'2" kid. Yeah. Who was the stud they had? The kid that picked the pass off against Alabama and ran it
Keely
back
Ringo.
He's also that's what he likes. He likes big, long, because they play a lot of zone. They play a lot of matchup zone. They play a lot of pattern match. He likes those long, rangy guys on the outside, kind of like Mike Mickens. It's just I think Notre Dame's guys run a little bit better than Georgia guys do, which is going to make some of the Georgia fans in the chat lose their minds because they don't think Notre Dame has speed and Notre Dame hasn't played anyone. And apparently we're convincing ourselves that Notre Dame has a chance to win. Apparently one Georgia fan. Most Georgia fans in the chat have actually been pretty good. But that's the thing is that they're young, and Daniel Harris doesn't run like some of the other guys run. That I think is, and Dalen Everett's just young. He makes a lot of young guy mistakes with his transitions, with his technique, with double moves, he's eventually, I think, going to be a stud. But right now he's just a talented young kid who's still learning the game. Like to your point, can they take advantage of that? Keep rolling, Trev.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, can they take advantage of those matchups? Can they win in space? Can they win on the perimeter? And then the final key to me is Riley Leonard's going to have to make some plays in this game. I think it's going to be with, both with his arm and with his legs, right? But I don't think he's going to have to come in and do anything overly. I don't think Mike Denbrock or the quarterback coach is going to ask him to do anything outside of his realm of capabilities in the pass game, right? Be a facilitator, be a point guard, be a distributor of the football. You don't have to go and attempt throws that you haven't had a lot of success in, but hit the easy throws, because I do think they're going to do everything that they can to get their playmakers in space. And then above all else, take care of the football. This is a team that hasn't really done a whole lot in forcing turnovers in the secondary, right? Georgia's entire secondary has one less interception than what a Don Schuler and Xavier Watts have combined for this season. And so this isn't a defense that's going to pick you off a whole lot, and they're not going to be returning a whole lot for a touchdown because they do a really good job of keeping everything in front of them. That's why their yards per attempt and yards per completion are so low. But can't be making the mistakes that they've made earlier in the season, right? Like Riley can't have that one like, oh my goodness, what was that interception? Because Georgia as a team is really, really good at capitalizing on forcing other teams to make mistakes, Yep. So for me, those are going to be some major keys into passing game success, man.
Trevor, the other part too is when you play games like this, Mike Denbrock's got to do his thing. Riley Leonard's got to do his thing. He's got to make good reads. He's got to get the ball out on time. He's got to make smart decisions. This is a game where you've got to protect the football. You can't put your defense in a bad spot by giving them a short field. But at the end of the day, to win a game like this, whose playmakers make more plays? Is it Malachi Starks and C.J. Allen and Nazir Stackhouse and Michael Williams and Jalen Walker, or is it Jeremiah Love, Riley Leonard, Mitchell Evans, Jadarian Price? But if Notre Dame's going to win this game, I do believe they need their receivers to step up and make plays. They have to be on top of their game. Jordan Faison's got to make plays. Jaden Greathouse has to make plays. Bo Collins has to be the best version of Bo Collins. Drops got to be gone. Got to be sharp as a route run. You got to fight like crazy for the football in this game. And that's the thing I'm most uncertain of in this game is, will the Notre Dame receivers play with urgency? Will they compete for the football? Will they go make plays? If I knew that they were going to do that, I'd feel a whole lot better about this game being a win, and a win where Notre Dame can kind of win where it's very clear they're the better team. But that's not where they are, because I don't know that they can take advantage of where Georgia is a weak spot. And that's why I say football is a game of matchups, right? Like Texas can take advantage of that for Georgia. But where they're weak is they're kind of soft up front. If we're not soft like the players are soft stylistically. They're slow. They're counters, wraps, traps, outside zone. They're just not a physical downhill running team. And that doesn't match up well against Georgia. Georgia Tech is a downhill tempo, up-pace team that matches up better against Georgia than Texas does. Notre Dame, if they had a better passing game, would match up very well against Georgia, but they don't. But can they step up and make plays? That's the concern. And ultimately, that's what this game is going to come down to, Trevor, is that right there. And we're going to have a little talk about game records here in a second. But before we get to the game records conversation, I do want to say this is the other part of this matchup that concerns me. Pass pro. This is a more effective Georgia team than I've seen in recent years in getting after the quarterback. And they get after the quarterback a lot of different ways. They obviously have good edge rushers. Mykel Williams, when he's healthy, is a very good edge rusher. When he's on his game, he's very hard to stop. Jalen Walker's a very good edge rusher. Chaz Chambliss is he's like their Jordan Patojo, as a pass rusher. Damon Wilson's going to be a future star. He's a real twitchy edge kid. And their inside guys don't get a lot of pressure. But my concern in this particular matchup, Trevor, is I'm not worried about their interior guys getting sacks. That's not necessarily my concern. If they're making sacks, it's because nobody was open. What I'm concerned about, however, is they do a pretty decent job. Brinson's pretty good at this. Nazir Stackhouse is pretty good at this, at just taking the inside of the offensive line and just pushing it back to where you have nowhere to step up to. You think about that throw that Riley Leonard made against Indiana. Climb the pocket, edge pressure comes out wide. Anthony Knapp widens it out. You climb the pocket, you snap the ball off, 44-yard gain. Right? That's kind of, we need to see that. Can they do that?
Yeah.
We're going to find out.
Yeah, I mean, pass pro, look, we've talked about it all season long, man. And it's one of those where we can talk about the receivers winning at the line of scrimmage and Bo Collins not dropping and every receiver, making plays on the football and fighting for the football, and Mike Denbrock scheming up whatever he can to get his playmakers in space. But it's not going to happen. Not going to happen if the pass protection can't hold up. And that's been an issue throughout the season, unfortunately. And so as long as they're able to, and I view this a way very similar to how I talked about the Texas A&M game in week 1, right? Is the offensive line doesn't have to go and play like they're a Joe Moore Award winning offensive line because in pass protection, they just have to do their job and hold strong, right? Like they just have to keep a body on a body. If somebody beats you, stay engaged, give Riley Leonard a chance to step up in the pocket and find players downfield, because he has shown one thing that I loved about him, and I said this in the post-game show. His athleticism took over in some plays, but Riley Leonard, to me, in parts of the Indiana game, went from being an athlete playing quarterback to playing quarterback, right? Like he was maneuvering outside of the pocket and keeping his eyes downfield. He was stepping up in the pocket with 2 hands on the football, maneuvering it away from pressure, keeping his eyes down the field the entire time, which is refreshing because he's talking about how much more confident he feels as a passer. And we're kind of starting to see it. There's things that still need to be cleaned up. He's not a perfect passer right now. And I don't think he has to be against this Georgia defense, but the pass protection has to hold up and give him opportunities. Because if it's going to be one of those where he's getting, an offensive lineman is getting forklifted back into his lap in quick game, it's going to be a long game. It's going to be a long game.
That's the big concern. I mean, honestly, that's the biggest concern I have, is that he just doesn't get time to throw. Everything's off his back foot. He's throwing from deep in the pocket. That's the big concern in this game. And Georgia doesn't have to blitz 6 guys to do that. Now, they're going to have a pressure package, to your point, Trevor. I mean, They don't blitz a ton on early downs, but if they think you're in a passing situation, as you mentioned earlier, they will heat you up. And they do have a sub package, right? And they will come at you in that regard. But even in their base downs, I mean, you just get that push from the inside guys with those good edge rushers, and there's nowhere to go. And if you have to try to spin out and get outside against these edge rushers, that's a tough task, especially if they're getting a good push, because now they can rush wider. And that to me it could be potentially the biggest kryptonite for this team is that right there. Are they able to handle that? If they can handle that, then I think they have a shot to do enough in the, because like they don't need to, like you said, I don't think they need to throw for 300 yards. If they throw for 300 yards and it's not because they're losing by 3 touchdowns at halftime, this game won't be close. They haven't done that all year, and I don't expect them to do that against Georgia. Because when we talk about Georgia's pass game struggling, it's not like they're like, Florida State or, Purdue. It's relative to what you expect from Georgia. That's more of where it's at. And I don't know. We're going to find out if they can do that. So we're gonna kind of move on to our game records conversation here, Trev, and have just some real quick fun with that. We're going to talk about why it's important and then have our fun with our predictions of our game records for the Notre Dame offense. And then, of course, we'll wrap up with some talk about the transfers. But before we do, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And of course, as always, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.